Can we expect to see more jobs coming from the South African mining sector? Do we expect the sector to contribute meaningfully towards GDP growth? Can we expect the sector to continue being a significant contributor to foreign exchange earnings? Will the sector support government revenues? Can we expect the sector to contribute more towards royalties? I think the key question we are trying to answer here is this. Is the mining industry in South Africa a sunset or a sunrise industry? And honestly, there is no straightforward answer. But as most economists will say, it depends. You cannot say yes or no, it is a sunrise industry, but we will certainly say that there are several identified challenges that needs to be addressed if this industry will indeed be a sunrise industry. To help us answer all these questions, I think we can start with data from Statistics South Africa, which was recently released. It shows an increase in mining production on a month-on-month basis, looking at February 2026 as well as January 2026. But what is a bit surprising, and if you're not careful, it might get exciting, it is the significant increase on a year-on-year basis. But we've discussed in this channel before that we look at the changes holistically. We do not only consider year-on-year rates, but we consider month-on-month, 3 months on 3 months rates, but we also consider other things before we take a suggestion from the recent movements in any economic indicator. Looking at the official data from Statistics South Africa, as well as the information that we can find from various publications, I think the most appropriate answer to the question of a sunset versus sunrise industry should be mining sector is neither. It is not a sunset industry as yet, and it is not a sunrise industry yet. It's a sector in waiting. It's a sector in limbo. It is waiting for regulatory and policy certainty. It is waiting for structural reform before we can really say it is a sunrise industry. Should those fail, or should those not be sufficient to support a bit of activity in the sector, then it will certainly be a sunset industry. Look at production volumes. What you are most likely going to see is the month-on-month or quarter-on-quarter fluctuations. But take a longer-term trend, you would see an almost flat line. If you look at the annual average production index, you would realize that it has remained unchanged for at least 2 years. The production volumes that you are seeing now, it's about 5% below what was recorded in 2019. And that has not changed from 2025, 2024, 2023, and even 2022. So this clearly speaks a lot about the structure of the mining industry. You don't see significant improvement, but you also don't see notable deterioration. You see a broad sideways movement. What is more surprising is that if you were to look at a graph showing total production over time, as well as mineral sales, you would see that a surge in commodity prices did support mineral sales, but those are nominal mineral sales. They're not adjusted for prices. But if you want to see the real picture, then you will look at the production graph. Then you see that divergence, a moderately flat or broadly sideways production, but you see a pickup in sales. That simply means that the surge in commodity prices that we've seen for over a year now, well, it's not all commodities, but certain commodities, yes, that surge in commodity prices did benefit sales because of higher prices, obviously. But if you look at the quantity, there has not been a significant improvement in that. And that becomes very difficult to say that the sector will then help grow the economy, the sector will help create employment, the sector is generally in a good condition. It's only sales that are going up, and that is because of prices. If the sector had growth potential and there were no serious structural impediments, then you would see production picking up as well, because mining houses will be tempted and they will ramp up production to try and take advantage of higher prices. But now, instead of trying to take advantage of higher prices, some of them decide to go the route of capital discipline. Instead of expanding operations to cash in, they decide to say, let's wait and see. Prices fluctuate, but the conditions in general, or the underlying conditions, are not really supportive of sustainable growth in the industry. Okay, back to the numbers. Let's see what information we can draw from this. We see a month on month increase and a significant year on year increase, but a decline on a 3 months on 3 months basis. What this means, if you were to really look at the month on month numbers, it was largely driven by PGMs, and maybe gold did that in January mostly. But the conclusion is that the month on month numbers was not really broad based. The increase was not because of a widespread increase across the mineral groups. The fact that the 3 months on 3 months growth rate was also negative suggests that activity is still subdued. Now we see a very exciting year on year growth rate. And if you're only going to focus on that year on year growth rate, you're most likely to say things are improving. But I would invite you to look at the level of the actual index. Then you will see that it is not that different from what we've seen the previous year or 2 years ago. Then we can say, yes, the increases that we saw in January and Feb do not necessarily mean that operating conditions or business conditions in the industry are improving significantly. It actually just means a recovery to the average levels that we've seen previously. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a month on month decline in March. But for the quarter as a whole, this is likely to turn positive because we've already seen a relatively strong month on month growth in Jan and Feb, and that might suggest that the sector will indeed contribute positively, although minimal, to GDP growth in the first quarter of 2026. And yes, we do not analyze developments in the mining sector just because we are crazy about statistics and numbers. The mining sector is an important industry in South Africa because it contributes meaningfully towards employment. Yes, it is not the biggest employer in terms of industries, but it does contribute to employment in the country. But added to that, the mining sector contributes quite significantly to government revenues. So the health of the sector does affect the health of our fiscus. Added to all of these benefits, we should keep in mind that the mining sector has close ties with other industries in South Africa, specifically the electricity sector as well as the manufacturing sector. Yes, we do understand that the country is growing in terms of financial services provision, but we cannot leave behind actual production. All the services activities that are happening, they are closely linked with what we see in producing industries. So the mining sector is quite important.